So we are starting our live video, and I'm inviting friends to watch. And you have to give me a few seconds here because I am broadcasting live from Sandersville, Georgia, from my mother's kitchen. And we're going to have an interesting show this evening. We're going to talk about the influence of black mothers on their sons. And my mother has definitely had a profound influence upon my life. And I'm sure that there are so many sons of so many ages in the audience who have had a similar experience where their mother has had a profound experience in their life. And this is not a show to bash black fathers, because I am a black father. And I realize that the contributions of black fathers to family lives are profound. But this is a show where we're going to talk about black mothers because I'm here in Georgia, in the small town of Sandersville, Georgia, visiting my mother. And I've been here for the past 5 days. I came down here on Tuesday, and I'm going back to Philadelphia. Well, actually, I'm flying into Trenton on Sunday morning. And I'm going to be in Atlanta tomorrow, visiting 2 other black women who have had a serious impact on my life, my Aunt Doris and my Aunt Christine, and also my cousin Gwen, who was a much older than me growing up, and she also influenced me. My life has been influenced by black women. So this program, this relationship show is going to explore some of the effects of black women upon black men, not just when we were young, but through all phases of our life. Because I think that there is never a time in life when black women do not impact the lives of black men. So let me see. And now that I've invited people to watch, let me see if I can get back to the screen. There you go. Let me see if I can fix things up so you don't have to see the entire. So this is going to be an interesting show. And how you doing, Brother Malik? And folks who are watching. And I'm actually broadcasting from my mother's kitchen in Sandersville, Georgia. So first of all, I would like to ask, am I being heard clearly? Because I tried to broadcast on Wednesday night, and I just wasn't heard clearly. So I just wanted to know if folks can hear me, and I am coming in clear. So if you could simply let me know that my words are clear and that I'm being heard, that would be very, very much appreciated. And let me see if I can arrange this so that we can have the best possible show and be able to move this forward. Okay. And as you can see, I'm definitely in the kitchen. Okay, Malika says she can hear me. And I would imagine that if Malika can hear me, everyone can hear me. So yes, I'm sounding clear. And that's very good. So once again, I'll say that I am definitely not in Philadelphia. I'm not in our studio in Philadelphia. I am in Sandersville, Georgia. And for those of you who, and good evening, Malik. Glad you could tune in. And for those who are familiar with Sandersville, Georgia, which is a very small town, and it's 2.5 hours south of Atlanta. I flew in Tuesday morning, and I got in the middle of the night, because I fly Frontier Airlines. And for those of you who live in Philadelphia and are flying south, Frontier Airlines is a wonderful option. Of course, you have to travel to Trenton and leave from the Trenton Mercer Airport. But in terms of the price and your options, you can fly down south you can fly to Atlanta for less than $150, sometimes less than $100. Now it costs $50 to check your bag. So for this flight, I think this flight was about $149. After my bag was checked, it was just under $200. It was I got a really decent rate on a car rental. So for me to come down for 5-6 days to visit my mother was an extremely economical trip. And I really had to get down here because one of the things that I'm going to talk about is aging. And our parents do age. And those of you who are over 40 and have parents know that there comes to be a certain amount of time. Let me see here. When your parents get older and they begin to, well, my mother has early onset Alzheimer's. So she has begun to lose some parts of her memory. And that's extremely traumatic for her. And it's also traumatic for those of us who love her, because my mother was the hands down smartest member of our family. She was the one who inspired our love of learning. I grew up in an era where every couple of years the encyclopedia salesman would come around, and they must have had our house address on speed dial, and it wasn't even speed dial back in those days. My mother always bought the latest encyclopedias. She subscribed to magazines. She took us to the library. She encouraged a love of learning, and all of our family were readers. To this day, we're all readers, and that was encouraged by her. She only had a high school education, but it was a black high school from Sandersville, Georgia. And in those days, in the days of segregation, the high schools were better because it was all black teachers. And the black school teachers lived in your neighborhood, and you knew them, and your parents knew them. So they were responsible to the parents in the neighborhood for education. So a part of what we're going to talk about is not only the black family and the aging of your parents, but the lifestyles that they led, the lifestyles that we led growing up. Now, I'm 64 years old. I'll be 65 January 8th. Yes, I know I look wonderfully young for my age. That's a joke. But the life that I've led and the things that I've seen in my life have had a profound effect on me, and I've actually lived through different eras. I lived through the civil rights era. I lived through the Black Power era. I lived through the war on drugs, through crack and death and destruction. So many things that I've seen in my life. And I've seen the evolution of the black family. I've seen evolution of black neighborhoods. So this is a relationship show because it's Friday, but the relationship we're going to talk about today is our family, the black family. And I'm going to use my family as an example because it is what I've lived. And while I can talk to you about things I've seen in other families, I'm much more credible when I'm talking about my family, because this is how we lived and this is who we are. And as I was saying, my mother has always been the center of our family. And that is the way it is for many, many black families. And that's not to negate the contribution of fathers. I would like to say I'm a good father, but for many years of my life, I was not a good father because I was an absent father. I was incarcerated. And you can't be a good father behind bars. And through many lives, not just in my family, but in many families, just last week on a relationship show, we had two young people on Morgan Burrell and Drew Lomax, who talked about how their fathers were absent. But one thing that has been constant in their life has been the love and the devotion and the sacrifice of their mother. Black mothers are truly the foundation stones of the Black family. And I want to talk about that this evening. I want to talk about the influence of Black mothers, the lives of Black mothers, and using my family as an example, talk about how this evolved and how it will continue. So in my family situation was a little unique. And when I look back on it, I'm kind of amazed at the trajectory it took. My father and my mother were both farm workers, because realize that when they came north, this was in the late 40s and early 50s. Okay, so they came to a place called King's Farm in Morrisville, Pennsylvania, which is right on the border next to Trenton. So we actually grew up in between Trenton and Northeast Philadelphia. Levittown and Bristol, that was the area that I grew up in. It's the area where my formative years were spent. And my father was a truck driver. He drove trucks for the King's Farm. And my mother worked in the packing house and she worked in the fields. And how things were in the 40s and the 50s for Black families is that was the aftermath of the Great Migration. Now, for those who are students of Black history, you know that in the 30s, after the Depression, there was a huge migration of Black people from the South. The reality is that most Black families have their roots in the South. It's hard to find a Black family whose mother, father, or grandparents are not from the South. Nowadays, with young families, it's the grandparents or the great-grandparents. But when I was growing up, our families migrated up from the South, maybe one or two people. And they would send out like forerunners, like my mother. My Aunt Doris, came north. And then my mother followed her. And she lived with her for a while, then she got her own place. And she met my father, and, they got married and lived together. And later on, my Aunt Shirley came up, and other cousins came up. And the families that were established housed the upcoming folks from the South until they're able to find jobs and get their own places. And that's how Black people migrated from the South to the North and spread their roots and transformed themselves. And this is how Black families grew strong. This is how our communities grew strong. But at the center of that was Black women. Black women have always held the families down. They've worked. They've worked in the homes. They have worked jobs. And my mother was the epitome of that. When we were young, she worked on a King's Farm, and my father drove trucks. She worked in the fields, and during harvest time, she worked in the packing houses, packaging the produce that was made. And then after a couple of years, when we saved money, we moved from King's Farm to Levittown, which was the first planned, one of the first planned suburbs in the country. There was a Levittown in New York, and there was a Levittown in between Philly and Trenton. And that's where this builder, Levitt, built the first planned communities, planned suburbs. But Levittown was all white. But what he did was he had one section of Levittown called Bloomsdale Gardens and Fleetwing Estates. And believe me, it wasn't an estate and it wasn't a garden. But it was a nice place for Black people to live. And that's where the Black people the Black women were housekeepers for the white women in Levittown. The Black fathers worked in the factories. My father drove trucks. He drove tractor trailers. He began to drive long distance. And eventually when that became, so much because we were getting older and he wanted to spend more time at home, he worked for Penn Fruit in Philadelphia. And his home base was 56th and Market. That's where the Penn Fruit warehouse was that he worked out of. And this was replicated all over Levittown. We had fathers who worked at the steel mill, who worked at all the different factories and the warehouses, and their wives, our mothers, were housekeepers, the maids. They did the work in the 50s and the 60s that were allowable for black people. And although we lived in a white area, it was segregated to the point that most of us, well, virtually all of us, lived in the black areas of Levittown, and we saw Philadelphia as our big brothers. That was where you went to go to the movies and to go to concerts and to go to shows and to do sports teams and buy school clothes. And that's how we grew up, like in the shadow of Philadelphia. We had extremely good neighborhoods. In Fleetwood Estates, where I lived at, on our street, Liberator Street, I can only think of one black family that wasn't a two-parent family. Those were the days in the 50s and the 60s where you had two-parent families. Nowadays, 60% of households in our communities are headed by single black women. But it wasn't like that in the 60s. It wasn't like that going into the 70s. It began to change as we grew older and we went to high school and went to college and moved out. The dynamics of our neighborhood began to change, and not just our neighborhoods, but neighborhoods all over the city. As factories began to close and families began to break up and the war on drugs started and the civil rights movement ushered in a new thought process, and we literally went from, when I was young, we were colored, we were Negro. Then eventually, and when I was very young, no one called each other black. For someone to call you black was an insult. I mean, you would get a fight in the schoolyard if you called somebody black. We were colored or Negro. But as the 60s moved forward and the civil rights movement gave rise to the Black Power movement, we began to be proud of our heritage and proud of who we are. But that didn't always translate in the communities where black people had been living a different life, and they weren't as involved with Black Power and the civil rights movement. So I remember growing up. I remember when afros first came out, and I had to fight with my mother and my father because I wanted to grow my hair long. And they were determined that I wore a Caesar or a traditional haircut because to them, wearing an afro was a symbol of black revolution and a black uprising. And they were middle-class people who didn't believe in that. They believed in working hard, getting along, getting an education, buying a house because they were homeowners. And while they were cognizant of the many changes that were going on in America, they weren't a part of that thought process. They wanted to watch the civil rights movements and the demonstrations on our television. And that's another thing. We didn't have a television until the mid to late 60s. I remember the first color television we ever got. It's hard to look back on the many changes, and when I try to tell my kids and my grandkids how we lived, they had no concept. My grandkids say, "What do you mean you only had 6 television stations? What was that?" And I say 3, 6, and 10, 17, 29, and 48. Those were our 6 television stations. And as we got better antennas, we were able to pick up Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 11 from New York. Nowadays, they literally have hundreds of television stations, and it's a different vibration. But I wonder if the change has been totally beneficial. And if our communities are stronger or they're worse off. That is like the argument about integration and segregation. It's my belief that while integration ushered in a new era for black families and for the relationships that we formed as black families, it also injured the fabric of black America. Because I recall coming south year after year to Sandersville, where I'm right now, as a child. And yes, it was segregated and we couldn't drink out of the water fountains when we went to the movie theater. We had to sit in the balcony. There were certain stores we definitely could not go in. We wouldn't even think about going in. But the black neighborhoods, everybody had to live in the black neighborhood. The doctors and the lawyers and the dentists and the storekeepers. We had a black community. We had black businesses that served the community. And segregation was a barrier to the outside world. You had black communities across the countries that were self-contained. And after segregation ended, there was a mass exodus when integration began and folks could live in other places. The best and the brightest and the smartest left our neighborhoods and went to white areas, and many of them forgot those black areas that they came from, and that began the dissolution of the black community. And that even happens today. What's the first thing that people do when they're making more money and they become higher income? They want to move away from their neighborhoods, move to somewhere, quote, better, and forget what they left behind. There's nothing wrong with upward mobility, but you should never forget those you left behind. But I've gotten a little off track. Let's get back to the black family and black motherhood. So I was saying that my mother was the driving force of our family. She was the one who made sure we did our schoolwork. She was the one who made sure that our thought processes were in place to be successful in life. She always taught us that we could be anything that we wanted to be. Although that altered when her religion changed and she became one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that started my family on a different trajectory, because for those of you who know what it means to grow up as Jehovah's Witness, that's a vastly different thought process than traditional black families. So even within the black community, we were different from other families because we went to the Kingdom Hall instead of going to church. We stopped celebrating holidays. We didn't celebrate Christmas and Halloween and Easter and birthdays. So that religious process separated us from some of those in the neighborhood. But there were many black Jehovah's Witnesses, and that was another self-contained community, and it gave access to brothers and sisters who, the older black brothers in the Kingdom Hall became my alternative fathers and uncles, and the young boys were my brothers, the sisters were my cousins. Black neighborhoods thrived, irregardless of your religion. And in my family, we had Jehovah's Witnesses, we had Baptists, we had Black Israelites, we had Nation of Islam. There was a rich and varied culture in our black neighborhoods that we grew up in, that often we don't see reflected today because black families are so transit now. We rent instead of owning, and we are more prone to leave a community than to sink our roots in the community and to work to build that community and to make it strong. And I think that that is one of the things that we really have to look at and think about how we build our community. But let me go back to my original thought. So my mother now is in early stages of Alzheimer's. And that means different things for different people. For us, it meant that there came a time in her life when she could no longer, long before she had Alzheimer's, she's now 86. it became harder for her to function. So my brother Ken, I cannot say enough about my brother, who has sacrificed his life and stopped what he was doing up north, and he was living in Williamboro, New Jersey, and he made the decision when mom became more frail, and really it became harder for her to function, not mentally. She was doing well mentally then, but health-wise, it got hard for her. So he made the decision that he was going to uproot himself and come down here and become her primary caretaker. So let's talk about that for a moment. It is vitally important in Black family relationships that we honor our fathers and our mothers. Now, for many of you who are Christians and who are Muslims, well, almost every religion has that basic concept. Honor your father and your mother. And as the scriptures say, that things may go well for you in your life. And that is true. He honored her to the point that he came down and changed his life so that he could take care of her. But that just reflected what my mother had done in the 1980s. She left, we were all grown and out of the house, and her mother, Mary Lee Jordan, began to fail. And she made the decision to come back here to Sandersville, Georgia, and she sold her house up in Levittown, bought a house down here, and took care of my grandmother until the day that, her health finally got to the point where she had to go into a nursing home, and then she continued to care for her in a nursing home. She wasn't one of those daughters who go to see their parents in a nursing home like now and then. Every day she went to the nursing home to make sure that my grandmother was taken care of. That's how our family lives. And that's how family should live. So for my brother to come and take care of my mother, it was a reflection of what he had seen her do earlier in life. And he's done a wonderful job. And I've been here this week, and I look at him, I've always loved my brother, but I have so much more love for him just after observing him this week, how dedicated he is to mom, and how happy she is when she is herself, in his care. He studied to be a chef earlier in life. He's a wonderful cook. He's probably the best cook in our family. Although we have one beef, he makes potato salad and he leaves the peels on. He says that the peels are the most nutritious part of potato. I don't care about that. That's some chef school white folks attitude. Peel my potatoes and make me some black potato salad. But other than that, he's one of the best cooks I've ever seen. And if you could see this kitchen, we went shopping today and he bought, so much stuff for the house. He's just fantastic. And my mother is thriving under his care physically. Now, mentally, it's another situation. I've been here since Tuesday night. Well, actually, Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. I got here in the middle of the night. There have been 4 times since I've been here that my mother has totally forgotten who I am. And I've had to re-explain, and I've been extremely patient, and I make, a lot of jokes, and I cajole her into jogging her memory until she comes back to herself, and she recognizes that I'm her son, and that, why I'm here. And I try to call her, as often as possible, and sometimes on the phone, although she knows who I am, she'll forget where I live at, or she'll forget what I do for a living, or she'll forget my children. And I'm very patient at always, patiently working with her. And sometimes, if she's really at a point where she's, like stuck in time, then I'll be Ricky instead of John Dye. Because she still sees me as Ricky. And if she sees me as, Ricky who's in his 60s and as her son, or she sees me as Ricky who's 15 and is, messing up in school, I'll be that guy. I'll be whoever it is necessary. And Ken and my sisters, they do the same. You know, my sister Jordan KL and my sister Linda, they come and they visit and they do her finances, and they have done so much to make sure that she has a quality of life. And that's what we have to do for our parents. A couple years ago, when my father had the stroke, and we were caring for him up north, when his time in the hospital was over, he was moved to a nursing home to get his strength back so he could be monitored before they allowed him to go home. But there was always the expectation that he was going to go home. But while he was in that nursing home, we visited him regularly, just like we visited him in the hospital. But we saw so many older people, and many times older white people, who were abandoned by their families and never got visits. And I don't know all their situations. I don't know if some of them might not have had family, but I'm certain many of them did, from them to be in a nursing home. But they didn't come to visit. As a community, we cannot abandon our elders. We have to take care of our families in the same way that they took care of us. And I see that Colette Payne, it says, I was a child and once an adult. I cared for my mom until her last day. She had dementia and leukemia. And yes, Colette, I feel you. I feel that it's very difficult when someone who you really love and you've known all your life and you've loved all your life, because nobody loves you like your mother does. Yes, me and my dad got a good relationship, and many times you'll see my dad on Facebook and we're going through it, because he's very funny and he's a great father now. But he wasn't always a great father. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that we really began to develop the relationship that we built upon throughout the years, and now he's my best friend, and he's someone who I love unreservedly. But it took us a lot of years to get to that point, because he wasn't always the best father to me, or to my brother, or to my sisters. But my mother has always been there. There's never been a time in my life when she wasn't a part of our life. Even when I was doing things that were wrong. My mother was the mother in Scarface. During my gangster years, when I was seriously getting money and out there in the street hard, and she knew it, and my brother was still in the house, I had to sneak past to see him. I had to sneak money to my sister and to him. I literally had to, even when I was hustling, I had to get a job, so I could give her money. If I didn't have a job and I couldn't show her a paycheck, she wouldn't take no money from me. She didn't want no street money. She was just like a Scarface's mom. She was serious. She's always been a serious mom. And she's always stood up for what's right. And she's always had a profound impact upon my life. Even when I was incarcerated and she came to visit me. We would have in-depth philosophical decisions, conversations, and it was serious. So now, in this situation, I'm getting glimpses of who she was. And for a large part of my visit, she has been that person, But there's been, like, today my brother was outside on the porch, and I was in the living room, and I was getting ready to go down to Dollar General to get a couple of things that I needed because I'm leaving tomorrow. And I walked past her room, and she was sitting on the bed, and I could see she was lost. She had no idea who she was. She had no idea where she was. She had no idea who I was. So I sat down, and for the next half hour, We had an in-depth discussion, and I really, I made her laugh. I told her jokes, I do this whole thing where I'm her favorite son, and, she loves me more than anybody else, and even when she's not herself, that always cracks her up, but what happens is, as you talk to her, you can see her coming back to herself, and after a while, she'll say something that lets me know she's back, and that she recognizes me, and, or she'll make a reference to something that happened far back in the past. Many times with Alzheimer's, the long-term memory is intact, and she can remember things that happened years and years ago, in the 30s and the 40s. She remembers things from her childhood. We talk about her mother and her sisters and how her life was, and that is clear as a bell to her. It's just, like last week, my daughter Lashika and my son-in-law Matt and my 4 grandchildren came to visit her on the way back from Disney World, and they had a wonderful time with him. They had pictures. She has no recollection of that, But when I show her pictures of them being there, that kind of jogs her memory. Or like out of the blue, she'll, point to a picture on the wall and say, "Who's that?" And I have to explain who that is. But you have to be extremely patient. You can't lose your focus. You can't let the frustration of seeing someone that you love not being themselves overwhelm you, even though it's really heartbreaking. And that's why I give my brother Ken so much credit, because he does this on a daily basis. I do this when I can get down here, and I do it on the phone, but it's different, taking care of somebody physically and mentally day after day after day. And that is why, for sisters and brothers who put in that work for our parents, there's a special place in heaven, and God is, smiling down upon you, and the ancestors are watching you, beaming in approval. Because this is what African people do. We do not abandon our elders. We do not say our time is too valuable to spend taking care of you. We do not say, yes, you can function, but not well, so we'll pay for you to be in a nursing home, so we ain't got to be bothered with the day-to-day. We'll come see you on Sunday. We don't do that. We marshal our resources. We marshal our efforts. Certain people make that sacrifice, and we support them in their efforts. And that is how you build family. That is what you do for those that you love. And I think that a part of what I wanted to talk about was not only family, but the transformation of how we view family. Nowadays, there are not as many families who are willing to make that sacrifice, who are willing to say, as my brother did, my life is not more important than my mother's life. And whatever I'm doing, I have to drastically change so I can care for her. And it doesn't matter how many years it's going to take, until she dies, or until there comes a time when physically she can't be maintained. Maybe she has to. For my grandmother, it was at a point where she could no longer eat, and she'd have a feeding tube. Then we had to put her in a nursing home because they could provide the level of care that physically she needed. And that's where we are. We're at, as long as mom can be maintained here in her own home, which she loves, even when there are times that she looks around and she doesn't recognize it as her home, sometimes she thinks she's in a hotel, And I said, well, it's a nice hotel. Look at this. This is an extremely nice place for you to be. But she always comes back to herself. But I guess you have to look at the reality that there may come a day when she does not come back to herself and she does not recognize us. And all the memories that she's had of her family that she loves will be lost. And that's what Alzheimer's do. And that's what dementia does, for those whose minds are on that track. So it is, the reality is that as our parents age, this is what we have to deal with. But when you love your parents and you are devoted to them and you want to make sure that their lives have quality, and that's what it's about. The fact that there has been times when my mother didn't know me, and I had to reconvince her that I was her son. That doesn't negate the times that she was vibrant and she was herself, and she has the most droll sense of humor, and when she does remember, she remembers a lot of the bullshit I did, and she calls me on it, and she asks me pointed questions about the time I spent in prison, and do you feel the things you were doing was worth all the time that you were lost to us? So she's when she's there, her mind is still as sharp as it always was, but there are increasingly more times when she's lost to us as that person. And that's something that we need to understand is the reality of life. And yes, there may come a time when, she's totally lost. But the fact that we have her this long, is a wonderful blessing. I talk to so many of my friends and associates, sisters and brothers, who say to me, be blessed, I lost my father this year. I lost my mother this year. I miss them every day. I'm blessed to have both my mother and my father in my life. And I spent many, many years away from them. And I truly regret the years I spent in prison more for the fact that I missed the time with my parents. I missed the time with my children. I missed the time with my then wife and my extended family, who many have passed on. I posted a really nice picture earlier this week of my mother with all of her sisters. She had six sisters and a brother. And they were at my grandparents' anniversary dinner. And they're all alive and healthy. And of that family who I lived, my grandfather and my grandmother are long gone. And my Aunt Shirley, Aunt Vivian, Aunt Juanita, have passed on. And only Aunt Christine and Aunt Doris and my mother and my Uncle James are left alive in my mother's family. So those of us who are in their immediate family are blessed to still have them, but I have cousins who have lost their mothers and their fathers, and now they are the elders in our family. And that's another thing. At some point in time, when our parents have passed on, we are going to be the elders of our family. And it's up to us to set the example, to create the opportunities, to use our finances, to use our knowledge and our wisdom to inspire our children. Now, I pray to God, I'm in good health, and I take care of myself, and I plan on being like my father. My father's 93 years old. He's still talking shit. He's still dressing sharp. Yes, he's physically weaker. He's had a stroke. He has a pacemaker. He has two reconstructed titanium knees. In fact, he says he's damn near a $6 million man. He got, so much artificial shit moving him forward, but that's what I want to be. In my 90s, still talking shit, still driving, still maintaining myself, still moving forward. But that may be my future. or my future may be something else. But you have to be the kind of person whose children is going to want to take care of them, who's going to want to love and cherish them, who's going to want to pay them back for the many years that they did for them. So you need to look in the mirror and say, am I the kind of person whose children are going to want to care for them when they're aged? And if there's any question, if there's any doubt, then what you need to be doing is reevaluating your relationships. This is a relationship show. Every Friday, we talk about the relationships in our communities, in our families. And I often say that family is the basis of relationship. If you aren't talking about relationships, you're not talking about families. Because it's how we treat people. It's how we talk to people. It's how we give advice. It's how we observe their life. It's how we interact with them that makes life what it is. If your children know they can come to you and talk to you about anything, and you're going to be in their corner, you are going to be responsive to their needs. You are going to show them how they can move things forward. You're going to give them solid advice. Then that love and stability may be all they need to keep their lives balanced. When you know you have strong support, many things become possible. And sometimes it's just a simple thing. Especially when you have extended family. When I call my daughters and say, look, I'm coming to get Kingston or Shakar or TJ, and we're going out for a Saturday. That's something they can, now plan on doing something different, because they have to care for their children. Or if they want to go somewhere, and they can say, will you come over and watch the kids? Or like when I say, me and the kids are going away for the weekend. I don't know what y'all doing, but me and the kids is out. That's beneficial. Or if it's just, being accessible. Sometimes it's not about finances. It's not about, advice. It's not about trying to direct someone's life. It's just about being there. It's about being a phone call away or a knock on the door. And you come in and giving hugs and showing love. It's just about knowing that you are loved more than anybody else can love. I truly believe that's why so many young black women have rocky relationships, because they haven't had that in their life. They haven't had a father who loved them unreservedly and says, this is what is best for you. And anybody who treats you less than the love that I show you, put his ass in the wind. And it's about mothers. My mother told me when I was very young, I was like, yo, in my house, we had weeks. We had assigned rooms. This week, I had the kitchen, then had the living room. Ken had the bathroom. Kay had the bedrooms. And then the next week, it would transfer. It would rotate. And we were assigned days to cook dinner. And she dropped us off at the laundry, and we washed and folded the clothes. And we ironed the clothes. And I would say, Mom, why are you making us do all this? And you know what she told me? When you get grown, and I was like 9, 10, She said, when you get grown and you choose a woman, I don't want you to choose a woman because you need somebody to cook for you or clean for you or take care of you. You need to choose a woman who you love, because you can take care of yourself. You know how to iron. You know how to cook. You damn near know how to clean. Anything that can be done in the house, I can do it well, because she took the time to train us and to teach us so that we were well-rounded in all aspects of life. And that's one of the reasons why we care for her so much, because she cared for us. My earliest memories is my mom doing for us. When I was a kid, I had allergies so bad that I would literally wake up in the morning and my eyes were glued shut. That's how. And I remember her, getting a clean wash rag and wetting it and washing my eyes open in the morning, and taking me to the doctors and getting pills for my allergies. The things that she did for us as a mother. I remember when my cousins drowned, TD and Babby, and TD was like my best friend in life, and he drowned, and my dad was like, totally broke up by it, but he was kind of caught up in trying to maintain his mom, who was really their grandmother and their mother, because they spent more time with her than anybody, and she was really broken up. It was my mother who guided us through that terrible time in our life. Every time in our life that really needed a support system, that needed strength and power and devotion, she was there. And many times my father wasn't. That's just how it is in black households. Many times our fathers are not there for us in the way that they should be. Sometimes it's circumstantial. Other times it's for whatever reason. It doesn't matter to a kid why someone is not there. It just matters that they're not there. So the person who is there, that's the person that they depend on. That's the person who has shaped them, who has molded them, who have helped to make them who they are. And that's what my mother was. She was the foundation stone of our lives. And so I offer her much love and respect for all that she's done. Everything that I am today is because of my parents and because of my family. Everything that I could ever aspire to be is because of them. And she's the central figure in that. She's the one who really did the most to make sure that we became the people who we should become. And yes, I took some roads that, they didn't agree with. I was rebellious. I became a gangster. I robbed banks. I did all sorts of things, that really dishonored their name. And my father and I have had some hard conversations about that because he's never been in jail, and he said, "You blackened my name," and he was serious about that, and that was a source of conflict for us for many years until, we became, closer. But my mother, even though, she may have felt the same, she never lost that love, She never castigated me. She was disappointed in me, but she still supported me. There's no love like a mother's love. So for the young gangsters in the street, understand that what you're doing, not just to yourself, but to the community, is a reproach to the mothers who bore you, who love you, and who want the best for you. In my current work, when I'm working in the field of stop the violence and I'm seeing so many mothers who are heartbroken by the murder of their children, of their young sons, I'm also seeing the mothers who have lost their sons, who were the perpetrators, and now they're lost to a life of life sentences behind bars. You cannot imagine the hurt that a mother feels in both those instances. The mother who has lost her son to death, and the mother who has lost her son because he was the perpetrator of violence. These mothers who have put their lives into their families, their lives into their communities, and now they're faced with a terrible future. We have to honor our parents. We especially have to honor our mothers. This was a show that is dedicated to the work, to the sacrifice, to the love, the affection, the devotion, the caring that a mother gives. A mother gives love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faith, mercy. A mother gives you all those things and more. There is no greater gift than a mother's love. And we need to honor that. We need to respect that. We need to understand that this will never happen again. You only get one mother. Yes, there may be situations where you have a mother-in-law or you have other folks in your life who take a mother's role. But there's nothing like the love of a mother. That's who brought you into this world. That's who gave birth to you. That's who not only gave you life, but in many instances, kept your life moving forward. I remember the times I was sick and my mother took care of me. Or the times that I thirsted for knowledge and she made sure I had it. The opportunities that she created for me because she believed in me. And the fact that she never stopped believing in me, even through the worst times of my life. That is truly what a mother does. So I'd like to end this show by saying much love, honor, and respect to all mothers, and especially to my mother. I dedicate the show to my mother, Mildred Harrell Jordan, and I wish for you a future that is clear in mind, sounder in health, so that we can enjoy more years with you, so that you can watch my grandchildren grow up and be the strong part of our family that you've always been. And if that does not materialize, we cherish the memories that you have given us and the many years that you have been the center of our universe and the sun that shines our world. Peace, power, and respect. Love your mothers. Love your families. Keep on building our community.